we're all gonna die, Caitie.
Oh, this was the pleasant opening you thought of.
No. Just because, well, I just thought of this now because it started raining, and then as we were talking before we started recording, it started thundering ominously in the background, like a I don't know what movie genre has thunder the most, like horror or suspense, yeah.
Suspense maybe. See, I don't really see that many movies.
Like an old detective movies. It might be raining, but there's no lightning necessarily.
I was thinking like a Hancock, not Hancock. Fuck, what Hitchcock? Movie.
Hitchcock. There you go. That's suspense. Yeah, for sure. Well, we pretty much everybody knows what we're talking about this week. People have been asking for it for a while, and so that's what we're going to be getting into. I did want to mention something that I noticed this week, though, just before we jump into everything. It had been a while since I looked at the iTunes ratings. Mm-hmm. And when I looked at them, and this probably won't be the case when I say this, because somebody's going to go in there and give us a 4 or whatever it is, just to knock. So we still have like a perfect 5 out of 5 rating. Like we have everyone who's ever reviewed, and it's only like, I don't know, it's like 50 something reviews that are on.
Well, still that's like 50 people. Wow.
Yeah, and I remember when we were noticing, like, oh my God, we got our first one, we got 10 or whatever, and then I think I haven't looked at it since then, and so to see that it's like, I think it was something like 50 people, and they've all left 5-star reviews, and just going through and reading them, it's really nice. It's like a really nice, positive, uplifting thing to sort of hear people really appreciate it, and even people who are like, I don't even like podcasts generally, and I like this one. That's really just kind of awesome. So thank you to anyone who's ever done that, and you don't have to leave a 5-star if you don't want to, but that's just the fact that happened or has been happening is really encouraging, and yeah, I just hope we did continue to deliver content that people appreciate.
Indeed. Thank you, everybody.
And now with that nice heartwarming note out of the way, let's stab ourselves in the fucking face as Bioware fans / Bioware content creators.
I feel like, so I will say, I don't feel as disheartened as like maybe everyone else, just because like I feel like that's just a personality trait I have, where I was like, well, everything sucks and I'm dying, but you know what, I'm just gonna be okay with it. So I feel like that's where I'm coming from, where I don't really feel as nervous or as bad about the situation, but I don't know if that's just like me being very resilient, or if there is actually, I don't know, something there to be happy about. I guess I just don't know where I'm coming from in the start of this episode.
Actually, now that you mentioned that specifically, I think I kind of know how to describe a little bit how I feel, and it's definitely not like doom and gloom. It's definitely not like, oh, this is all so terrible, or I'm mad, or even sad, or anything like that. Mm-hmm. It almost just kind of feels like I have a job to do. I would actually compare it a little bit to how I feel doing my actual job and my actual day job before I have to present, because I'm an analyst, and so before I have to present information that I know is not a positive outlook, and then I have to sort of help develop recommendations for how to fix it, and I know, because I know what I'm looking at, that none of the recommendations are pleasant necessarily, right? Like there's one way out of this and none of it is good. And there's almost like a little bit of like, okay, I have a job to do, right? It's like I have to perform a surgery or do a thing that's like, it's messy, but this is what I do, so I'm going to do it, but I take no joy in it, kind of a thing. Which is weird, because normally I approach the podcast and all the content that we do is like, this is fun and like whatever, but in some sense analysis is fun, but I just kind of feel like what we're looking at now, there are a couple ways out of it and none of them are good, or none of them are pleasant. Like they're all going to require some real battening down of the hatches sort of a thing. But I guess we should give people the overview first, right?
Yes. Do you want to do it?
I can try, yeah. I mean, everyone. Right. I think everyone who's listening to this probably already knows, but essentially a couple weeks ago, Jason Schreyer came out with an article that was based on, I'm pretty sure, months of reporting and investigation on the state of Bioware as a development studio overall. He looked into their working conditions, but also specifically he looked into the development of Anthem. He interviewed 19 people who are with the company or formerly with the company who worked on Anthem or near Anthem, Anthem adjacent, etc. And, basically painted a picture of a lot of struggles during the development, a lot of in the feelings of the people that he spoke to, a lack of clarity from leadership that led to some of the less than desirable working conditions, including a lot of crunch and a lot of extra time spent working on the game in order to get it in a playable, potentially successful state. There was a lot in there that we can go through, but that's basically the gist of it. That sort of set the Bioware community on its ear. And then, let's see, maybe like 4 days ago, something like that, he released an article talking about the past and present of Dragon Age 4 and what has happened so far in the development of Dragon Age 4. And what hasn't happened in the development of Dragon Age 4, and then that also kind of gave us more insight into what's going on in the company, and more insight into what Dragon Age 4 was supposed to be, and to what it may be now. Mm-hmm. There's a ton of depth in both of these articles, so I don't know where you want to start, as far as like jumping into which one of those or how you want to tackle this.
Mm-hmm. So I feel like there's 4 different points that I kind of want to talk about today. One of them is the Bioware crunch / management situation. What they talked about, I guess what Schreier talked about of the development of Anthem, and then Dragon Age, and then the reception to both articles from like the fandom and then also Bioware. So I think that's the 4 things that I want to touch on. Do you anything else you want to add or for that lineup?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's pretty much it. I think you nailed it with that.
Okay. So I'm thinking of like just doing the shortest one first, which I feel like is my reaction to the what was talked about with Anthem and like its development. Because I feel like so I can't remember, like we recorded that Anthem episode at like, Saturday night, and like it was a weird situation because I was recording on like a laptop and with my shitty mic, which I normally don't do. So I don't remember what we exactly said because it was 2 hours of us rambling a bit. But I feel like whatever impressions that when we talked about it like on and off air, when I was reading that article, everything just started to fall into place of like, oh, this makes so much sense.
Yeah, the incongruence piece that we talked about, where it felt like it was a vision executed by people who didn't feel that they owned the vision. Uh-huh. That's exactly what he laid out.
Yeah, and like this is something I emailed you later after we were talking about the article. So we like the article goes into like how the story was, I guess, written in like a year or less, and like it was changing so often that sometimes they would record scenes in the mocap session and then get calls during the mocap session saying, I'm sorry, but we changed the scene. Can you re-record it? Like, we just spent all this money. No, we can't. Like, it was going that quickly with the writing.
Yeah.
I feel like that fact just explains almost like what happened with the Neil Blomkamp thing. Like, I really do think that the story that he had probably written fit into an earlier version of Anthem's story. And then when the game changed so much, they realized they were completely incompatible, and that's why they had to cut the story into some weird trailer, because this like they just weren't going for whatever he made the movie about, which is crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, no, I agree, right? And that's a good point, because I don't know how long the lead up time was for Blomkamp's short film, but they went to locations for that, right? Like, they got some pretty impressive shots. Like, I imagine you have to line all that up well in advance, and then if Bioware just keeps changing the story, there's nothing you can do about that.
Yeah. So it's I guess, which I will say I saw a lot of people saying like, oh, well, now that I know this game was made in like a year, I'm a little bit more forgiving about it. And like, I feel like yeah, I get it. At the same time, I'm still going to be extremely judgmental about the story, because like Dragon Age 2, made in a year, like the only saving grace for that game is the story. Where in Anthem, it's almost the opposite, where the saving grace for Anthem is the gameplay and the story is just kind of...
Yeah, also, that is not an accurate representation of what happened. The game was not made in a year. The game was not made in 18 months. The game was made in 6 years.
Yeah.
And when we talk about, same thing with Mass Effect Andromeda, when the predominant amount of content was created in 18 months and 12 months, there's no way they get a pass for that. They had 6 years. The fact that they didn't get their work done until 18 months is, it's a representation of a lot of failures across the board. And so, I noticed that as well, too, is people sort of using that vernacular of saying the game was made in 12 months or it was made in 18 months. Like, no, the game was made in 6 years. They just didn't get their act together until the end.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I feel like really all I wanted to say on Anthem is I don't want to say like pat ourselves on the back, but more like, yeah, like even though we had no idea really the behind the scenes, we were able to kind of get the gist of like, okay, yeah, this is kind of what happened on our own just by looking at the state of the game.
That's what that 5-star review is worth, baby. We know. No,
we know our shit.
No, you're right. It's not really patting ourselves on the back. It's more just, I guess at a bare minimum, we just describe it as we were able to see what was there.
But it's like also not just us. It's like everybody. Like everyone's like,
right.
Okay, this is totally what happened. And then this is just an article going, yeah, that's what happened.
That's exactly it. It wasn't just us. I think everybody kind of saw what was happening. And it would probably be more surprising to me if we didn't get that right, because in a lot of ways it's obvious.
Yeah. And I think this all kind of leads into the next point I want to go into is the crunch/management part of the Anthem article. Because essentially what went wrong in Anthem, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but that's the impression I got, it was bad management. Yeah? Do you agree?
Partly. That's
Partly?
That's a tough one for me, because that is such a blanket term that I hesitate to use it, because management can be a vague term. Are leads management, or only managers management, or only like senior, or like actual directors of departments management? I don't know. That's a tough question. Partly, I think it's absolutely clear that there were instances of bad leadership that contributed heavily to what happened with Anthem and what's happening with Bioware.
Mm-hmm. So then, like, this article, just like they were talking about like kind of how crazy the crunch was and people taking like sick days just for like mental health, and like they even had doctor notes to do so, and like people like locking themselves in rooms and crying and stuff like that, which I will say, like, if I could critique these articles for one thing, it like I do feel it's a bit dramatic. Like if only one person locked themselves in a room and cried, like that's actually pretty normal, I would say. If it was a couple people, then like, okay, yeah, that's something to worry about. But if it's only like one person, like, okay, I've had people at my job lock themselves in a room and cry. Like, it happens. But so yeah, I guess the way he painted the picture of BioWare is that it was, at least at the time of crunch, people didn't quite, like, they were being overworked, they didn't quite know what to do, and when they tried to do something, they were told that it was wrong. And then, like, they felt like their voices weren't being heard, and when they said, we want, like, better feedback, we want better, hours if possible, like, we could have worked on this in advance, but you changed your mind on what we should do, and there was changing goalposts, and all sorts of stuff like that. But I think it's also good to point out that this isn't necessarily just a BioWare thing. This is happening all across gaming in industries in general. Schreier tweeted out that he was getting a lot of PMs from people in other industries saying, like, this is happening to me where I work, but I work at a different company. So. Oh, yeah. A lot of the stuff that he was talking about it's common across all industries. It's just common in businesses. It's just common where you have a large number of people trying to work on the same thing broadly. Like, a game is a broad project. There's tons of different, there's art, there's coding, there's design, there's all these other different sort of projects inside of one overarching project. And so anytime you have something like that, you're going to have these issues. So yeah, I think a lot of it just like struck home for me, because it just sounds like anyone who works in a big company. Mm-hmm. And I'm totally not surprised that some of these things are going on, but also it's like, you got to handle these things, man. And I don't want to sound judgmental for it, because it happens to everybody, but some of the things that were mentioned, like, meetings not being efficient, having a meeting and coming out of the meeting with no action steps or no clarity about what was actually discussed, no decisions being made. I can totally empathize with that. That happens to a lot of people, a lot of fine professionals in a lot of different companies. At the end of the day, you've got to run better meetings. Mm-hmm. That can't be an excuse or not an excuse, but it's just like, okay, was that happening during the entire 6 years Anthem was made?
you guys were regularly, no one ever thought to sort of tackle directly the fact that we're not having efficient meetings. I can understand if that happened during a period of time, like, hey, we had a couple months there and then we fixed it. And then 3 years later, we started to have the same issue again for a couple months and we fixed it or something like that. But, again, some of these descriptions, they are kind of anecdotal and I can't judge one way or another because I don't know. I don't know what the normal cadence was. Was this every meeting? Was this most meetings? Was this some meetings? We don't get that level of detail in this. We just know that it happened at some point that was probably more than just a one-off in the 6 years that Anthem was being developed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I almost feel like the main takeaway from what I'm going to call the Anthem article was like, yeah, Anthem had all these flaws in it, but the real takeaway is that the developers at Bioware are just having a really hard time right now. And I think another thing it kind of stressed is that it's not exactly EA's fault either. Like, maybe EA had a couple decisions that did throw some wrenches and, like, they suggested a couple things that they should do and they went with it. But it's not EA's fault that BioWare's turning out, like, at least critically panned games. It's BioWare's fault. No one to blame but themselves. Like, EA suggested EA said that we would like you to work with Frostbite, and they agreed to it. We would like you to make a multiplayer experience live service, and they agreed to it. Like, it kind of sounded like, at least this is what I gathered from the article. Everyone keeps saying, like, oh, poor BioWare, they're trapped in EA. But, like, it's not, I don't think EA is quite the villain here as we think it is. I think it's a little bit more complicated.
No, absolutely not. EA is not the villain. EA has made a couple of bad decisions that we know based on Jason Schreier's reporting. For the most part, I'm actually I'm pretty pleased with what EA is actually, from what we know. Again, I don't know enough to really give a grade, but based on the facts that are reported in the Schreier article, I think it's preposterous that people would blame EA for this. So there's a couple of things that I actually want to address that are sort of like, I think, sort of common misperceptions. So
go for it.
The Frostbite thing. Okay. Mm. Frostbite is probably or almost certainly not the easiest engine to work with, and that seems to be pretty clear given all of the different feedback that that's been put out there. But the idea that it produces critically sort of maligned games, it's not exactly true. Mm-hmm. The average review score is actually not very low at all. So, and I broke this up amongst DICE and non-DICE games because that's a real critical thing. DICE developed for the Frostbite engine to be it's basically the Battlefield engine. Mm-hmm. It was made for Battlefield games, so they invented it, so they're going to be very good at it. On average, DICE games get an 82 in Metacritic for their games, and other games get a 74. Which is not great, but it's also been increasing over time slightly. So when you look at the Metacritic scores for non-DICE games, they're actually improving overall, our Frostbite games. And they're not really producing that bad of a game. I think that is kind of a misperception that is not supported by the data, right? Is that Frostbite games are going to produce bad games. Also, do you want to know what the highest rated non-DICE developed Frostbite game is?
What is it?
It's Dragon Age Inquisition. So the most critically well-received game in the Frostbite engine, not made by DICE, was made by Bioware. So I don't know that that's an accurate excuse for Anthem. Mm-hmm. I just by the way, Mass Effect Andromeda was a 76. So it's not really as bad as we remember it. So Mass Effect, so we know that basically BioWare can make a game that's pretty much right on near the average of what most Frostbite games do, which is not that bad. And then we also know that, actually, I take that back. Dragon Age Inquisition is tied for the highest rated Frostbite game, period, including DICE games. Battlefield 1, Battlefield 3, and Inquisition all have the highest. They're tied for the highest rating amongst all Frostbite games. So I know Frostbite is difficult to work with by all accounts, but I don't think it's fair to say that because it's Frostbite, it's going to have some problem critically. Mm-hmm. That just the evidence just doesn't bear that out, specifically even at BioWare and specifically with an RPG. So That's the one thing.
To really quickly add to everyone who says, well, Dragon Age Inquisition, which is the highest rated one, sucked a lot because it had all these problems. I think something to add is that a lot was actually planned for Inquisition, even implemented, but because it was going to older consoles, had to get taken out. So I think that's another reason why, like, a lot of, like, the side quests seemed boring. Well, they did try to actually make bigger side quests in, like, that one demo they put out. It did have more important side quests and whatnot, but because of the console limitation, they had to take that out and I guess make the current side quest system. So, like, it's not technically Frostbite's fault that the side quests are bad. It might actually be more had to do that they had to put it on the 360 and the PS3. So I just want to throw that out there.
That's a very important point. So yeah, I don't think EA is wrong necessarily for sticking with Frostbite. I think Frostbite is a totally workable engine. Here's where I will, before I go into the two things that I loved from EA, let me go into the one thing which I really did not like. There's one point where Jason Schreyer talks about the fact that people were taken from Bioware to, they were reassigned to the FIFA team to work on finishing FIFA. Not a fan of that move. I'm not really a fan. The only I don't know that I would ever be okay with it, but I don't like that move generally. I don't like EA sort of imposing that we're going to come and we're going to take some of your staff because they've gained this experience in Frostbite and we need them for something else. However, if that's the position you're put in, it is incumbent upon BioWare leadership, whoever the studio manager is most likely, to say, wait a second, you're taking my people. Okay, how many are you taking? How long are they going? When do I get them back? And here's the most important part. What do I get for this? When FIFA wraps on when they final their game, do I get an equivalent number back now that they're done with their crunch to help us? Like, what do I get in return for this? There's no way that the BioWare, and I don't know if they did this or didn't do it. So if they did, kudos to them. If they didn't, they should have, because there's no way you can let that happen and not get anything that's equivalent in return as far as resources later on down the line. I didn't like that portion of it when I heard that from EA. However, when it comes to Anthem specifically, I'm pretty sure Patrick Soderlund might have saved Anthem.
With the flying thing?
Well, with the flying thing, but there's a very important thing that Mr. Soderlund said that somebody should have said a lot sooner than that. Patrick Soderlund is the oh God, what's his exact title? He's a chief executive. He's one of the top executives at EA. Maybe he's the operating officer. Doesn't matter. Apparently, he's one of the first people who, when he said it, he sort of was dismayed by the fact that he didn't feel that this is what was promised at a point where internally BioWare also wasn't impressed with what they had. Do you know what I mean? This was Schreier was talking about how everyone, was sort of like, this is it. I think it might have been the Christmas build that they were playing one year where nobody was particularly excited by it. And Patrick Soderlund was the one who said that this isn't acceptable. Mm-hmm. I go, somebody should have said that a long time before that. Like, somebody should have said that a long time ago. And the fact that Patrick Soderlund said that, it's actually depicted in sort of it's depicted as being not very positive in Jason Schreier's article. And I understand that's because that's the perception of the people that Jason Schreier was talking to. Mm-hmm. But that's a problem, that's a mistake, and that's not correct. Patrick Soderlund probably did more for Anthem than any of the actual BioWare leadership. When he came in and said, this is not good enough, this is not acceptable, that was correct.
It felt like a parent correcting their child when, they did something shitty, That's how I guess I read it.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I guess in a way, I saw it exactly as an executive.
I don't do business. I do families.
But,
what am I expect?
An executive who is, he doesn't work at BioWare. He's sort of the executive over BioWare at EA. He probably, he certainly doesn't know any of the ins and outs of developing the game. He just knows the end product. Not good enough. So when he said that, he said it doesn't look good enough graphically, and there's I don't even know that he specifically talked about flying, but they put flying back in to try and impress him, and it worked. When they spruced up the graphics and when the flying came back, Patrick Soderlund was very happy. And you know what? Honestly, if Anthem didn't look as good as it looked, and if it didn't have the flying, man, that would be a big problem.
Yeah.
I agree. That would be a big problem if it didn't have flying and it wasn't pretty. So Patrick Soderlund, fuck yeah. Sorry, I know I'm rambling a lot, but let me get to a couple of other things that I just thought were excellent from Soderlund. Apparently, in order to get the graphics to be a lot better, he brought in a bunch of other people from the Frostbite engine team, like people from DICE to spruce it. That's exactly the right move. That's exactly what an executive should do, is offer up more resources if things aren't going well. Also, why didn't BioWare leadership ask and or demand that earlier? I'm sure they probably said that they did, because there's a portion in the article where it says, oh, well, we weren't getting responses back from the Frostbite team quickly enough. We couldn't get them from meetings. We couldn't get responses back.
Yeah, I was about to say that.
Like, that's... Aaron Flynn, I guess, who's a studio manager, you got to get on the phone with somebody, Patrick Soderlund, someone at EA, and go, not acceptable. We're dying here. Like, this is not going well. We need more resources for this. So Patrick Soderlund doing that, excellent. And then an executive who I've never heard of before this article, but she's an executive named in this article, Samantha Ryan, apparently brought in people from, quote, from every other, from all the other studios around EA to work on the finishing for Anthem, which basically means that EA saved BioWare's ass. Right? When I saw that, when it said that she brought in teams from all across the publisher to close out the game, I think there's no way that she does that unless that's the only option. In other words, we are going to miss ship date again. This game is not going to be finished unless people from outside of BioWare finish the game for BioWare.
Which is kind of crazy.
That's insane. I thought of that as being incredibly sad, but also like executive leadership, good leadership from Samantha Ryan and Patrick Soderlund saved Anthem. There were some mistakes made by EA, but good executive leadership from Samantha Ryan and Patrick Soderlund saved Anthem to whatever extent that it was able to be saved. Completely disagree with anyone who says that EA is to blame here.
But because everyone just has a bug up their butt about EA, it's always EA's fault, even if they read the article. I just don't get it. Like, I get it. They're doing some shitty things, too. But, like, things are complicated. You can't just write them off as the evil villains. So, yeah, I guess that's something that kind of bothered me about the reaction to the article, which we'll get to, I guess, in a later bit, because I want to talk about Dragon Age first. But, man, people are just so quick to, I don't know, just, like, even after reading it, still say, poor BioWare. If only EA didn't put them in this position to begin with. And, like, I don't remember what the thing I was reading, it was an interview, and I can't remember who it was with, but they were saying that if EA didn't buy out BioWare, they would have closed down because they just didn't have the money for it. The only reason we still have BioWare is because of EA. And, like, I know everyone didn't like Anthem, but it kind of sounds like it would have been so much worse if EA didn't step in. I don't know. I know everyone wants to have their awesome gaming opinions, but, like, at least from this article, and, like, at least from a couple things that we have intuitively got from the game, like, it just sounds so plausible that, like, EA helped save this game and not BioWare. But whatever. And I will say it also sounded like Casey Hudson coming back helped a lot too.
For sure.
So, yeah, and that's something that, let's quickly also touch on BioWare's response to the Anthem article.
Oh, and then lastly, to throw out, while we're talking about who saved Anthem, Mark Dara for the win. Am I right?
Yeah, fucking Mark Dara. So I something that at least I got out of the article, I can't remember if this is specifically only about the writing or if it was also just about major game choices, but it kind of sounded like they were doing a lot of things by committee and no one could say no to anything. And like they would try to make decisions by completely agreeing with each other and like compromise, and it just didn't work very well. So when Mark Dara got in there, he laid down the law and says like, no, we can't, no, we're not doing this. We're not doing this. We are doing this. And like that helped development so much, which is why you can't rule things by committee.
Right.
Like,
which is why the concept of decision making by consensus is stupid.
Yes. So, which we kind of also talked about on the other, but that's never mind. But, yeah, so Mark Dara and Casey Hudson both sounded like they were doing good jobs. I also don't want to, you know what? No, well, I'll bring that up when we go into the reception to the article. But real quick, let's talk about BioWare's reception to it, because I think this just fits in nicely here. BioWare then published, I will say, so the Anthem article came out, and I actually saw BioWare's response to it first on my feed, because it came out about 20 minutes after the original article was published.
Right.
Jason Schreyer says that he gave them bullet points about the article of what he was going to say and asked for a response, but he didn't get any and whatever. But they didn't read the full article. I highly doubt they read the full article before writing all of this and publishing it, because it took me like 45 minutes to read the entire thing. You know, no way you can skim it and then write it and then publish it and then also review it from a bunch of people. So I'll say that. But I feel like a lot of the reception or from the blog post from BioWare about it was kind of just fluffy. Like, yeah, these are a lot of problems and we're working to struggle them. But that at the very end, it's something that I completely disagreed with. And I am very, I guess, disappointed in BioWare is that they said that we like, they essentially threw Schreier under the bus and says, like, this isn't how you should be reporting by, criticizing, others, and this isn't how we should do gaming journalism because it's mean or whatever. And I completely disagree with that. Like, I guess this goes into, like, do you view the Schreier articles as a hit piece or not? Because I really don't. I don't feel like they are. Like, maybe they were a little bit dramatic. I think that's fair to say. But I don't think he was really sitting there and trying to bury BioWare in a pile of shit. Like, I think he was just exposing the shit. You know what I mean? I feel like there's a big difference there.
Yeah, I feel mixed about the response. It depends on how BioWare's response. It depends on how you view the practicality or the function of that response.
Mm-hmm.
If the purpose of the response is to capitulate, well, then obviously it's a bad response, right? Jason Schreyer and a lot of other people are sort of viewing BioWare's response within only one frame. Are they capitulating quickly enough and thoroughly enough?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, maybe that's not what BioWare and EA want to do. So then what type of response is it, right? There are a lot of people who are taking the content of the Jason Schreyer article as gospel. And when I say that it shouldn't be taken as gospel, that's no knock on Jason Schreyer. He's reporting on what 19 people told him.
Mm-hmm.
Hundreds of people worked on Anthem. Hundreds of people work at BioWare.
And I think we should also point out is that at the 19, we don't know how many aren't working for BioWare currently. And
right.
If you're not working for BioWare currently, you probably left because you didn't like it. So there probably is some hard feelings there.
Right. And you probably don't like it even if you're still there and you're talking to Jason Schreyer anonymously, right? I mean, yeah. People don't like to use this term when reporting like this is done because they feel it's reductive, but it's not reductive. These are disgruntled employees. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that their viewpoints aren't valid. It doesn't mean that they're not disgruntled for good reason. But they are disgruntled employees who feel like they have exhausted all of the internal methods to try and get these items addressed, and they're now going outside of the company to speak anonymously to a reporter about these issues. So when you talk about it being dramatic, that's exactly what it is. It's Jason Schreyer is talking to 19 people who have had it. They've just had it, and now they're speaking in a way that's probably not measured because they're tired of speaking in a way that's measured. When they're talking to leadership and HR and all these other things, and they're just letting loose. He's talking to 19 people who are venting. That's going to be a little bit problematic. So the response from BioWare, I thought in some way it was actually a good response. Oh no, sorry.
Well, I don't necessarily disagree with some of it because, like, I totally get. In the article, they specifically name Mark Dara, Casey Anthony, and they kind of poo-poo. Aaron Flynn Casey Anthony. Who the fuck is Casey Anthony? I don't know.
Wasn't that the person from that one murder thing?
Oh my god, it was.
I go, wait.
Where did that name come from?
I go, holy shit. It was Casey Anthony, right?
Yeah, no, it totally was. Why did I say that?
I'm like, oh, gee, like, you know what? I think Bioware's in trouble. They got Casey Anthony up in there. Everybody.
My God.
Holy shit.
I'm so confused at my own brain right now. What the fuck
Casey
is
Hudson.
happening? Yes, Casey Hudson and Mark Dara. But they kind of hinted that Aaron Flynn was the executive the Bioware manager that wasn't doing a good job, but they didn't name him. So I completely understand that the Bioware has to take a stance like, okay, you are saying you are spotlighting two of our employees as good, but other people are going to be resentful for that. And then you technically spotlighted another employee as bad. We have to protect our employees. I totally understand that they have to say poo-poo on the article. I totally get where that's coming from. What I completely disagreed with was then poo-pooing on Jason Schreyer. I don't think that was appropriate. Everything else is completely fine. I was like, okay, this is just, they have to do this. I totally get it. But when they started saying that, like, we expect more out of our journalism, blah, 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 he shouldn't have done that. Like, I was like, okay. I disagree with this. And that's the part I have a problem with.
Yeah, it was a bit defensive, wasn't it? It was a little bit I don't say butter. That's such a crude way to describe it. It was a little stung, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, BioWare was already sort of acting a little stung. They sort of cast themselves in the victim role a little bit by throwing that out there. And I don't want to cast aspersions on Jason Schreyer, because I think he's a really good reporter. I've talked about how much I've liked his reporting for a long time. I think he's a reputable guy overall, who doesn't take swag from, at big events, is careful about, what benefits he takes as far as flights and accommodations and all that stuff to industry events. Good for him. That's the right way to handle it. That's a professional at work. He's talked about his method on his Twitter feed as far as, if I hear one person say something, I'll try and corroborate it. Do other people say the same thing? If other people say something different, I try and include both of those. If only one person says something and I can't corroborate it with other sources, I'll say one person said this and that. I think about the crying. I can't remember if it specifically said one person mentioned the crying or if it was multiple people, but I'm pretty comfortable with his methods as far as how he's getting that. There's two things that give me concern about Mr. Schreier. Number one, I think he's very empathic towards the people that he's talking to, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. However, I don't know necessarily that he is, and this is tricky because you don't want him to editorialize, but I don't think he's doing a good enough job of reading out the emotion from what he's being told. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that from his perspective, he would say, well, I'm not going to do that because it's not my job to read anything in or out of what I'm being told. However, I don't know. Maybe it's incumbent upon the readers to read out the emotion. Maybe that's the right move. But the reason why the article feels dramatic is because the people who are talking to him, like I've said, have had it. And I think a lot of the reporting that he's doing right now on BioWare, it sounds like a platform for those people who are upset, and maybe he views that as a good thing. I would view it as more of a good thing if it was a neutral platform to sort of display the issues that are going on and not just the rhetoric from the people who are most frustrated by it. Mm-hmm. That's one thing that I have concern about. The other thing that I have concern about, and it's a large, complicated thing to talk about. Jason Schreier is not objective when it comes to discussing workplaces and working conditions. Jason Schreier really believes that unions are the best way to solve all worker company-related problems, and he really likes unions, and he thinks that the game industry should be unionized. Jason Schreier, along with all members of Kotaku, are part of a union. Mm-hmm. And he wants everybody to unionize. That's a fair enough position. That's a fair enough thing to write in an editorial. He has every right to hold that view and to be a part of a union himself and to think that unions are great, but that is an opinion. And every time he writes about these things, even if he never mentions unions, you go onto his Twitter feed and it's after he tweets about them, it's all about unions again. Mm-hmm. Jason Schreier wants everybody to unionize. Jason Schreier wants BioWare to unionize. if he reports things in a way that makes the situation seem more dire, that sort of lends credence, I'm sure, in his mind to his argument that the entire games industry should be unionized. I'm not saying that means that he is deliberately changing the facts of what's happening to support his views. I'm saying that he's not going to be cautious of an agenda slipping into his work in this case, because the views of the people he's talking to align with his own personal views. And if the views of the people he was talking to were something that he found to be egregious or not reputable, he would be more concerned about that. In this case, he's not, because they have the same views as he does, which is that we need to form essentially that we should be forming a union to sort of posture up against EA and Bioware and take more control of our working conditions, which again, totally fine opinion to have. But I don't view any of his work on these topics as objective. And most people, in fact, I don't see anyone talking about the fact that Jason Schreyer is completely pro-union to the point where you can't go on his Twitter feed without noticing it. He tweets every couple of days about unions. Mm-hmm. He just had a piece published in the New York Times, sort of on the piggyback of all of this, talking about how the games industry needs to unionize. Mm-hmm. I don't know. What do you think about that? Am I crazy for thinking that he's not objective here?
No, I think that now that you bring it up, that's a good point to put on the table. But I also think that maybe one reason people aren't pointing it out is that like a big problem with how we interact with media is that we kind of forget to talk about people's biases and how it comes into article pieces. And so, like, we only really read and pay attention to media that agrees with our personal biases. So I guess this kind of leads into something I want to talk about later, but we'll just go into it now. The reaction to the article, you have a lot of people saying, you know, this is the best article ever, you know, I agree with it, you know, whatever. But then you have people on the other side saying that, no, this is a hit piece, this is terrible, you know, my poor Bioware, whatever. Like, they're just completely disregarding it because this is how we just, consume journalism nowadays. We either agree with it or we don't, and we don't try to think about it critically. This is the problem. Mm-hmm. So, like, I totally agree with your points that, like, yeah, he's probably, like, even us saying what we say now, like, we are coming with our own biases and opinions, and we're kind of hoping that, like, people that listen to our show and kind of know a bit about us know are kind of where we're coming from when we're talking about this. And this is a kind of a reason to pay attention is who's writing articles, because, you know Jason Schreyer, I know a little bit on the Twitter and whatnot. We know this is a bias they're coming from and how to read the article because of that. But that's kind of hard to do because there's so many, like, journalists nowadays that it's kind of hard to pay attention to who's who writing what.
Right.
That's entirely another thing, though. But I'll be honest, I lost where I was going with this. I had a point I want to say. Shit.
Last thing I'll say on the Bioware response on their statement. I agree with the fact that they didn't comment for the article. I don't think that they needed to read the whole article to comment for it. If they got bullet points and they knew specifically that you're talking to a bunch of people who are not happy, and by the way, they already know that they have people talking. Jason Schreyer has had sources in Bioware for a long time because of going back a long time, the Andromeda article most recently and significantly. You already know it's not good. You already know it's not going to be positive towards your studio. And the problem is, there's this cycle in journalism where you seek comment from the topic of a critical piece, and then you go, one of two things. You reach out to them for comment, and you say, we reached out to them for comment, and they declined to comment, or we did not receive any response back from them. Mm-hmm. It looks bad. I don't know why it looks bad. It looks like you're hiding. It looks like blah, blah, blah. That one little paragraph has a lot of weight. We reached out to Mr. So-and-so, and we did not receive a comment back. Mm-hmm. Ooh, it looks bad. The other thing that happens is you seek out comment, and if you send them 4 pages of response back, they take one sentence that's like the most generic sentence in what you sent them, and they go, we reached out to comment to so-and-so, and they said, quote, I didn't do it, end quote. And that's all they put. It never really helps you to respond to the article, because they're going to take the shortest, most generic thing that you said. They're going to throw it in there in one tiny little paragraph, and then they're going to continue on for the rest of the 11,000 words, which is how long Jason Schreier's article is. And they're going to malign you, and it's going to look like it's going to look like you basically agree with everything they said or you disagree with it in the weakest way possible. So I actually agree from a strategic standpoint that they did not respond to the article. If you're EA, if you're Bioware, your goal in all this should be to mitigate the response from this article and then handle it internally.
Well, I agree with that. Like, I think it's entirely appropriate that they declined to comment, as I'm actually looking at that one line of the article right now by happenstance. But, no, I guess I just disagree with the timing. Even if they didn't, here's the thing. Even if they didn't read it, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, whatever. No one really cares. But a lot of people got butthurt that they didn't read it, even if they didn't need to. I feel like it was a bad move on their part because people were like, oh, coming at you, you didn't even read it. You didn't even hear the sides and the points, blah, blah, blah. So I think it ended up looking worse because I did it so quickly. And I think if they just waited like an hour, maybe make an hour and a half, it would have come out a lot better. You know what I mean? Just as a strategic sense, I feel like they should have waited like an hour or so because I felt like to the mass people who don't really have a good sense of what's going on or just doing their gut reaction, that would have looked a lot better.
Yeah, it's an easy, you open yourself up to an easy attack of people saying you didn't even read the article. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I do agree with that because it opens yourself up to an easy attack.
I kind of wish they did read. I don't know. I'm still just kind of. I'll use the words butthurt on just taking pot shots at Schreier about like attacking employees because I don't know. I still just don't think he was attacking employees. Like I just don't. And it's kind of hard, sticky situation because you say, well, he did publish something that was negative to at least one employee that even though he didn't say the name, we can all kind of assume who it was. I
said all along I thought Aaron Flynn was fired.
Yeah.
I mean, so it just confirmed what a lot of people already thought.
Mm-hmm. Now, I don't think it technically said he was fired, though. We're still, I guess, they didn't technically say he was fired. We're all just going on the assumption.
Well,
yeah?
It says that they changed leadership. It says that they changed leadership. Mm-hmm. So it's basically he was fired.
I agree with you. I just feel like we should point out that like they're probably never going to say the words fired.
Yes.
It just functionally was fired.
Because people at a certain level don't get fired anymore. They resign. They resign. I mean, this is so normal. I can speak to this in a number of different ways. Like people do not really get fired. Also, by the way, for anyone that ever thinks, that we're bashing Aaron Flynn or anything like that, good Lord, could you find a nicer person, at least from the outside looking in? Every time I've seen him in interviews, he seems like possibly the nicest human being who's ever lived. Aaron Flynn just seems like a great guy, so I feel really bad that maybe things didn't go as well as they could have for him at BioWare, but I don't know. That is my gut instinct on what happened because of how Andromeda wasn't going well. Doesn't mean he's a bad person. He seems like a great person, but...
Well, yeah, I guess as a quick aside on that, like, there is a huge difference between, like, being a good person, being a good worker, trying hard or whatever, and then, like, doing, I don't want to say good job, but just, like, things working out well. Like, he could have done the best he could, but just... there were other factors that we don't know about and that he had to leave. Or, like, maybe he's just not, like, it doesn't really fit that he's the main operator of the company. Maybe he's a really good manager, but as, like, for everything,
studio manager,
maybe it doesn't work too. Yeah, studio manager doesn't work out too well. So, like, I don't want to say, like, the guy shit at his job, because, like, there's a lot of things we don't really know. Like, what if... this is completely hypothesis. What if he was just having a really bad time in his home life? Maybe he had a really big death in the family. There was that guy that died in the company. Maybe he was good friends with him. It was affecting him badly. Right. We don't know. So I feel like even just saying, oh, he sucks and he's the reason for it. No, that's not it either.
So many people can criticize, but one of the really tough things about leadership that people don't understand is that when you're a leader, you're essentially being paid to be exceptionally good at fixing things that aren't actually your fault, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. Right? So when you talk about like there might have been things completely out of his control and that's why things didn't go well, that's 100% true and it is a good reason to be empathic with someone. the real kind of kick in the balls about being a leader at a high level is that's part of the job. You have to solve things that are not your fault. You have to solve things that you didn't do wrong. You have to solve things that are unfair. And however good you are at doing that, that basically defines how good of a leader you are, right? Dealing with things that are flat out unfair. So when somebody doesn't do as well, it's like, oh, that sucks, because it could happen to anyone and you never know how unfair the situations are behind closed doors. So you feel bad, but then at the same time you go, well, look, maybe somebody else can do it better. And so you give somebody else a shot.
Something else I want to bring up while we're talking about kind of this thing. There is a... I'll preface this saying a lot of people saying this are people I know and I have worked with, and I just very much disagree with their points. So I kind of just want to talk about this because I'll be honest, it kind of annoys me a little bit. So I am coming from that perspective, but I also want to say this in like an empathic way, I guess. There's a lot of people who are very angry at Schreier in the article because it's a hit piece and he obviously hates Bioware and has a bug up his butt about Bioware, and therefore, you know, we shouldn't listen to him, is essentially what I'm getting from there. Maybe that's not what they're trying to say, but that's what I'm getting from the comments they have been saying about the pieces. Do you have anything to say about that, or agree, disagree?
I don't think it's a hit piece. I think that Jason Schreyer is a good reporter. I think that he tries to be on the up and up. I think that from what I know about his methods, that he has good methods. I think that he is transparent about how he puts these pieces together, and he's transparent about why. I mean, he says he doesn't talk about it specifically, you know, when people ask him about the Bioware article, he's like, well, I really hope that people at Bioware have good working conditions. I honestly wish he would just say, and I really like unions, and I wish that Bioware would unionize, because then that would be stating his bias a little bit more clearly. Here's the only concern I have. I don't know what Jason Schreier's relationship is with any of these 19 people. Kotaku has had some issue with some of their writers being friends with game developers and then not disclosing the fact that they are personal friends with these game developers before they write about their games. They've then had to address that, and now they are... Well, look, they're supposed to now have disclaimers on these things. So if I trust Stephen Totillo, who is the editor-in-chief at Kotaku, they should be acknowledging this if it's the case. If only Jason Schreier knows who his sources are, I mean, normally I would think that potentially your editor would also know, so that they can be a part of the process of, you know, corroborating and verifying your sources. But if they don't, if Jason Schreier is the only one who knows exactly who his sources are, and he's the only one making a judgment on what the relationship is, that gives me some pause. Like, if Jason Schreier goes out for drinks one time with some of the people of the 19 people who he interviewed because it's at an industry event, are they friends? I don't know. Maybe you're just going out for drinks because you're all at South by Southwest, and that's kind of what you do. It's networking. What about 2 times? What about 4 times? What about all the time? Do you hang out with these people? Do you call them and sort of text them? Do you have a big group text going on with 5 of them where you guys just talk about whatever because you're just friends? It's not about a source for a story or anything like that? I don't know. I literally don't know these things, and so it's difficult because I don't want to cast aspersions. I don't have any evidence that that's true, and the evidence suggests that if it were true, it would be getting disclosed. But I think to the point of those people who are perhaps concerned, the reason why they're saying that is because if Jason Schreier is just essentially wanting to offer himself up and his work as a platform for people who are his friends so that they can be more successful in complaining about their bosses, that would be concerning. It doesn't change the facts of anything, right? Because if the same things happened, well, the same things happened, right? If it's a bunch of unpaid overtime, if it's all this other stuff, those are facts that have to be evaluated on their own. But it would give me some pause because we're not clear exactly on what his relationship is with all of these people.
See, I agree with that, but at the same time, I feel like the people that are really against him in the article that at least I've been seeing haven't really been talking about that so much, but more like, you said bad thing about Bioware. Bioware's the boy.
We got to go fight him.
we gotta go fight. We're gonna bring out the switchblades and start singing gang songs or whatever. This is more West Side Story than actual gangs, but
gang songs.
I couldn't think of the word of gang, West Side Story, so that came out, and now
Oh my god!
Now this episode's called Gang Songs, apparently.
Jesus Christ! Gang songs.
I couldn't think of West Side Story. Okay, now that that's out of the way, but my point is, if you want to poo-poo Jason Schreyer and the article, I'm totally okay with that if you give good reasons. I just feel like the reason of I like Bioware, you said bad thing about Bioware, poo-poo, I just have a big problem with, because I feel like that really just belittles the point that he's trying to bring up, and it's not really a good point. And I've read a whole bunch of tweets and threads about this, and I look at the points they're trying to say of when they're trying to say, no, I'm not a fanboy, I'm just have these points. I'm I understand what you're saying. All I hear is I'm a Bioware fanboy, and I refuse to hear anything like that. And I just, I don't know. I guess I'm just disappointed. Is I guess the point I'm getting at. I know there's always going to be I don't know. I guess I'm just kind of disappointed in a lot of the fan reactions, and something that someone tweeted out that I agreed with. Don't be a fan of brands and companies. Just be a fan of the creators and the piece of media. Don't just champion Bioware. Maybe champion, just Dragon Age. I guess I don't know.
I agree with that, but I agree with it in regards to Jason Schreier's brand also. Because there's a lot of people who are they're sort of like Team Schreier, who are, and I see rhetoric that is essentially tantamount to, don't ever question Schreier. He's right about everything. He's never been wrong.
That's fair. That's true. There is the other side of the thing that are fanboys for Schreier. That is completely accurate as well.
But I agree that there shouldn't be people who are just opposed to criticism of Bioware. Bioware ought to be criticized the same as every other company and every other person. Everybody is subject to criticism. Mm-hmm. I don't agree with the idea that the Jason Schreyer article should not have happened. I have a couple of concerns with which I've stated about some of the things, that are sort of, I guess you could say, methods, right? And sort of maybe what he could have done slightly better as a writer and as a reporter. In my opinion, he's a very he's an experienced professional who I'm sure would have good rationale for why he didn't do the things that I thought he should do. Mm-hmm. No, go ahead. I'm trying to formulate a thought, but go ahead.
Well, I was going to move on to the Dragon Age article.
Okay, then the last thing I'll say about the Anthem Schreier thing. I think that the article should have happened. I think that it can help that the article happened. Mm-hmm. Where the defenders of Bioware might be a little bit right is I don't know that. Actually, I'm fairly confident that it does not help if Jason Schreyer keeps doing this play-by-play of what's happening in Bioware. Mm-hmm. I think the article can help. I don't think it helps when he tweets out a couple of days later. They sent out an email responding to my article, and they said, don't talk to the press. And then he tweets out again. They sent out another article, or another email that's slightly better, saying that we're going to address the article, but still don't talk to the press. They just had an all-staff meeting talking about, let them deal with it. It is not going to help if Bioware has to, and I know some people disagree with this. Those people are wrong. It is not going to help if they have to solve a very complex, people problem in public every step of the way. That is an in-house problem. There does have to be accountability, and there does have to be outside accountability. If things continue to have a pattern over time of things that are just continually not being addressed internally, even though they're being brought up and pitched in the right way, in a constructive way, and they're just being totally shot down. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, some outside accountability might be better. It is not going to help if Bioware has to fix this while Jason Schreyer is doing a play-by-play on Twitter. Mm-hmm. Because what's going to end up happening is they're going to start to second guess themselves, because every word that they say is going to be put out publicly. And that's just not an appropriate way to deal with these issues on quite frankly on either side. Because if there was if someone in BioWare leadership was talking to like, Jason Schreyer or somebody else, like just somebody, and they had like their own guy like over at Kotaku, and they were just saying like, well, it's just really stressful to me that everyone is just, whatever, like all the people that work for me, they're doing and talking about everything that they feel everyone else did wrong, everything else that they feel the other side did wrong. Everyone would know that that's shitty. Everybody would know that that's sort of like, well, why are you airing out what your employees are doing? There's this inherent disadvantage because these people are in leadership that they are exercising the appropriate amount of restraint, right? Any of these people, any of the BioWare leaders could go on Twitter right now and talk about like, do you know what it's like from our perspective? Do you know what it's like to be in charge of all these people who, 250 people work for you, and sometimes because you're human, you can't remember everyone's name. And yet sometimes you have to walk into their meetings for their department and talk to their leads and talk to the team and give constructive feedback on people that you might talk to once every 3 months. And you have to tell them that some of their work maybe isn't quite up to par and we need to do better. And the perception around that, like there's a million different challenges around leadership. And at any point, Casey Hudson or Mark Dara or anybody else could go on a tirade about how hard it is to be in that position. And they don't. Mm-hmm. And they don't, because they keep it in-house and they keep it inside, and that's for the better of the studio, that they maintain their composure. So it's a little bit one-sided, and when Jason Schreyer keeps doing the play-by-play, it's not going to help. It is not going to help. It's going to make things worse, because the internal discussion is going to get worse because of the external pressure. People are going to be less honest. They're going to be less vulnerable. They're going to be less transparent. They are going to be less likely to admit mistakes because of this external sort of harrowing. So I think that the article should have happened. I think that maybe Schreier should distinguish a little bit between there's enough content over a long enough period of time to justify a second article, and I'm going to keep tweeting out little micro updates.
I guess I'd be curious to see if he keeps on doing it. Like, because the last tweet he tweeted on, let me double check before I say something. The last thing he tweeted about BioWare was, as of recording this on a Saturday afternoon, 18 hours ago. He says BioWare held a long all-hands meeting for staff on Wednesday to talk about various issues raised by both a couple of people I've talked to are optimistic, blah, blah, blah. So if that's the last one, then I feel like, okay, good. But if these tweets coming out, there's another article, then yeah, I can say like, okay, let them handle it, Jason. So I guess, yeah, I agree with you. Now
we got to get on to Dragon Age, right?
Yeah, let's get on to Dragon Age.
Into this.
Yeah, we got Dragon Age. So I guess I feel like I have the most emotional attachment to this one because Dragon Age is my baby. So I guess I'll kind of give the rundown for this as from how I remember it. So I guess the Anthem article that was like kind of like, I want to say like 1/4 Anthem's development was really turmoil, and then the rest of 3/4 were like just working conditions in BioWare. This article was in pretty much entirely like the struggles of the Dragon Age development. I guess the TLDR of it is that all BioWare games have like a code name, so like if things get leaked out, it's whatever. Like apparently Inquisitions was Nugopolis or something like that, like something silly. Anthem's was Dylan's, as after Bob Dylan, and so Dragon Age 4, the first rendition of it was Joplin, and then another one was Morrison. So I guess the story of that was Joplin was working kind of good. I think they was about 2 years on it development when EA basically like came in and was like, hey, we would be nice, I guess, if you could have some live service elements. And there's also something like a part of it wrapped up in that a lot of the Joplin team had to get moved on to Andromeda and then Anthem because it was essentially all hands on deck to ship the game. And then after kind of Anthem development was going into crunch mode, they kind of shut down Joplin and they rebooted it as Morrison, which is kind of what we're getting now. And apparently it's different enough that it needed a new name. They're going to be using the code base into kind of air quotes code base for Anthem rather than whatever they were using before. They are talking about more live service elements, which is the article didn't say for certain what it's going to be, but one I believe this was something out of Bioware, not just out of Jason Schreier's mind, but one hypothesis is that it's going to be a single-player story, but going to have co-op elements, kind of based on how you do things in Anthem, for like the drop-in, drop-out type of thing, which honestly doesn't sound that bad, but that's another thing. Joplin was apparently going really well development-wise. They had a very clear idea of what they wanted. And then when that got shut down, Morrison's kind of having some confusion of trying to be take elements of Joplin into them, but then also be something new with this new live service element. And I guess it doesn't. I don't think it really says that they're struggling with it, but I think it is kind of hinted at that they are struggling with it a little bit of like how to actually do that. So that's why Dragon Age 4 has been taking so long, because they kind of shut it down and rebooted it to be this new whatever Morrison's going to be. Do you think I got everything? It's kind of a long story.
No, I think you did. I mean, let's just jump right into it with what I think is the most important, what I thought was the coolest part of the whole article. Tell people what Joplin was.
Oh, yeah, this would actually be better as just reading right off the article. So let me quickly look for the actual quote.
Like when he actually started I want to let you do it, because I feel like when I read it, I was like, oh, Caitie is going to be would have been so excited. When he talked about like what the actual story was going to be, I'm like, that sounds fucking badass.
Okay, so I don't really know where to start. Okay, so I'm just going to read off the article. Another former Bioware developer who worked on Joplin called it some of the best work experience they'd ever had. We were working towards something very cool, a hugely reactive game similar in scope than smaller in scope than Dragon Age Inquisition, but much larger in player choice, followers, reactivity, and depth. They said, "I'm sad that game will never be made." You'd play as a group of spies into Venter Imperium, a wizard-ruled country on the north end of Dragon Age main continent, Thetis. The goal was to focus as much as possible on choice and consequence, with smaller areas and fewer fetch quests than Dragon Age Inquisition. In other words, they wanted Joplin to be the opposite of the hinterlands. There was an emphasis on repeat play, one developer said, knowing that they wanted to make areas that changed over time and missions that branched in interesting ways based on your decisions, to the point where you could even get non-standard game overs if you followed certain paths. A large chunk of Joplin would center on heists, and the developers talked about building systemic narrative mechanics, allowing the player to perform actions like persuading or extorting guards without the writers having to handcraft every scene. It was all very ambitious and very early, and would have no doubt changed drastically once Joplin entered production, but members of the team say they were very thrilled about the possibilities. End quote.
Holy shit. I literally... A smile spontaneously appeared on my face when it said you'd play as a group of spies into Venter.
Can I quickly throw out something that a patron of mine on the Discord said that blew my mind? This that we just read is the basis for the comics that have been put out. So the Dragon Age, Knight Errant, and Deception are all heist based. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you think that was meant? Oh, that was always meant to be synergistically, or do you think they lifted this story once they realized they weren't going to use it?
I don't know, and that's the question I want to know. Were the comics? Did Bioware commission these comics to say, okay, we originally planned for you to find this thing with Starkhaven and to I guess spoil the comics, sorry, and the what happened with the Red Lyrium Idol. And that was going to be a path in the game, or now they're like, okay, we're not going to be able to get to that, just make a comic about it, and that's how we're going to explain it away. What happened? Or was it just a tie-in? I have questions.
That's a good question, yeah.
Yeah. So, I guess, going back to the article, I do want to point out, this is very cool, but a very important sentence here. It was all very ambitious and very early and would have no doubt changed drastically once Joplin entered production. these weren't fully implemented yet. I think it's really cool ideas, but remember, each of the games so far had cool ideas that had to be bunked for whatever reason. Just because this really cool idea, we really like it, doesn't necessarily mean that's the game we would have gotten. That's just what they were going for. And I also think that maybe we don't really know if we're not going to get that with Morrison. I know Morrison's going to have more things, but we don't know if they're completely trashing this idea. Not even in the article. It specifically says in the article, we don't know how much of Joplin is going to make it into Morrison. So technically, we might still get that. We just don't know.
Well, that's an important point. We don't know. We don't know exactly how much of that would have made it into Joplin, much less how much of it would have made it into Morrison. I mean, the whole pattern in game development that you can see across a lot of games, but especially in Bioware games per Schreier articles, is that they start off one way and they change drastically. We didn't go into all the details of Anthem, but he talked about how like Anthem started off as something totally different, with like a very realistic spacesuit, and it's more like sort of traditional planet exploration, blah, blah, blah. So it could have all changed. You're right about that. But still, that being said, how much did you want to play that game?
Oh, I mean, of course I want to play this cool idea. Like, yeah, no, totally. Like, the one that I liked, the thing I liked was, what's the exact quote? Like, missions branch in interesting ways that led to non-standard game overs. I'm curious.
Yeah.
Could there been like a fairly, I don't know, like, could there be an option where Solus wins and that's just like a legit ending to the game? Kind of like the end of Mass Effect 3 where you can shoot the Star Kid and that's a legit ending of the game. It's like you fail to stop the Reapers and then you see Liara's thing come up going, hey, we fucked up, but here's your data.
Yeah.
Which I will say, with Mass Effect 3, that was kind of like the ending of that saga. If they had this idea for Dragon Age 4, would Dragon Age 4 kind of be like kind of the ending of the Dragon Age saga?
Oh,
I wonder if that's kind of what they were doing. So that's, I guess, interesting and to me. But, because if they have non-standard game overs, then, like, how are you going to carry that over to another game? Are you planning another game? Like, what? I don't know. That's a whole nother issue. I guess kind of what I want to talk about is, I don't know, just why Joplin was poo-pooed and garbaged, and then Morrison reborn, and why are they so different that the name had to change? I guess that's what I'm interested in. And I've talked to a couple different people. One person I talked about who, they do work for a game company, but by their own admission, they don't do coding. They do something else. So, like, they don't know for certain. But their hypothesis was that they, when you kind of, they talk about doing the code base. And apparently the code base is so integral to pretty much everything. It honestly would have been extremely hard to take what they had in Joplin and put in this new life service element, and it would be just so much easier to just do it from ground up. And the reason for the codename change is because they have all of these like elements that are probably file named Joplin or whatever that can no longer be used in Morrison, so they have to keep it at least separate enough in like the file names and like categorizing whatever, so things don't get confused. Because you can't say Dragon Age 4.1, Dragon Age 4.2, people are probably going to get confused on it. So it's kind of something more for the team members, not necessarily that they're that different, but just kind of help people recognize that this is something that at least like the assets in the code can't be shared very well. So I was like, okay, that sounds, I guess, less scary. And it makes more sense to me why they would change, like, the code name. I still, reading the article and reading over everything, I still don't get why they had to stop production on Joplin, other than EA just saying, hey, we have to do this live service. Which I will say, real quickly, just fairly recently, another piece of the puzzle, if it even is a piece, they recently announced that new Star Wars game that Respawn is doing, who is owned by EA. And they're doing it on Unreal Engine, and they just announced that it's going to be no multiplayer, no microtransaction Star Wars game. To which everyone's going, well, hold on. How did they get away with that? But then Dragon Age 4 couldn't be like that. Why couldn't the Dragon Age 4 be on the Unreal Engine with single player, no microtransaction? What gives? And I, quite frankly, I don't know about game devs to give a good answer about that. But I guess I feel like I just have a lot of questions I don't really have answers to.
I can answer that.
I'll go for it.
Because it's Star Wars.
Okay, that's fair.
and if you look at EA's portfolio, Bioware is, I've said this continually, they're like the smallest piece of it, right? Their portfolio is Madden, FIFA. Actually, it's FIFA Madden, if we're really being honest now. FIFA is the big king for them. It's FIFA, it's Madden, it's Star Wars, and then it's Battlefield. And then Titanfall and whatever Bioware happens to be doing. So yeah, I would say, simply put, it's Star Wars. And then just based on the brand alone. Second of all, I mean, there were reports, and I don't know how true this is, but there were reports that the Battlefront 2 thing was like, at some point, it was on the level of like Bob Iger, who's the CEO of Disney. And it's basically like the god of entertainment at this point. Like, Bob Iger is not like a regular, like you hear CEO of a company, like, yeah, I get it, important rich guy. Like, no. Like, I just imagine like they summon Bob Iger down from the mountain when something like, I imagine like he has other executives that actually just run the company for him. Because Disney is like, somebody said like soon they're going to own 75% of the entire film industry or something like that. Like, Bob Iger is the king of that. So if he notices, like if he's like the Eye of Sauron who just notices that there's like some little problem with one of his lights, like I imagine that if he called Andrew Wilson, with all due respect to Mr. Andrew Wilson, the CEO of EA, it's not like, oh, hey, like you're a CEO, I'm a CEO. No, like if I was Andrew Wilson, I would shit my pants if Bob Iger called me mad about something. You know what I mean? Like,
that's
like
fair, yeah.
I will let the game development studios from my publisher use whatever the fuck they want. They can build video games out of Legos for all I care. If you think that that's what you want, Mr. Iger. So if that happened, and the folks over at Disney said, yeah, when it comes to our games, and let's be clear, if it's a Star Wars game, we don't give a fuck who's making it. It's our game. They get to use whatever they want. I think that might have happened, and that might be the reason why.
Real quick, you just reminded me, I was actually watching, I swear this is really, I was watching a documentary on Lego. It's the Toys That Made Us on Netflix, and there was one on Lego, and they talked about how they kind of did some, like, I guess, bad company decisions in like 2003, 2004 era. And Lego was entirely kept alive from sales of Star Wars and Harry Potter Lego kits. And when there was 1 year that there was no Star Wars or Harry Potter movies, the company almost went bankrupt because we're making so much money just on those kits alone. So I guess with that in mind, Of course, like, this thing's going to sell like hotcakes. So, yeah, I don't know what I would... Now that you say it's Star Wars, what'd you expect? I'm like, okay, yeah, actually, that's a good point.
The difference... I think the difference with Battlefront is that it was made by DICE. And so, of course, DICE is going to use Frostbite. That's their engine. And, of course, they're going to put microtransaction in it because DICE is wholly owned by EA and has been. I mean, DICE basically is EA and has been for almost, like, 10 years now. But, so yeah, that's a good question, right? I was kind of thinking about that as well, about why. That's the important question, which you brought up. Why? Why did they reboot Dragon Age? At first, I almost thought it was in the article that it was just related to the fact that maybe development was struggling. But as I'm rereading it, it doesn't say that clearly.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah. It really just glosses over why Joplin had to be cut.
I combined the two. Did you do that too, where you almost like combined the two articles?
A little bit, yeah.
And I'm like, oh no, wait. In the Dragon Age article, it never says like development was going badly. And that
it just says it stopped.
I don't think that EA pulled it. I don't think that EA pulled. I might be totally wrong about this, and another Jason Schreyer article will come out 5 years from now, and we'll find out I was wrong. Dragon Age Inquisition won Game of the Year. It was the most successful BioWare launch ever. I don't think EA would pull the plug on it. If BioWare feels good about it, I think they would let them roll with it.
Right. I agree. So
it was rebooted in November of 2017. Is that what it says, right?
I'll have to look on it, but I'm going to say sure.
October. Okay. It was rebooted in October of 2017. Yeah. How about some wild, unsubstantiated speculation?
Go for it.
Casey Hudson returned to BioWare in July of 2017. Do you think Casey just saw something he didn't like? And I don't mean creatively or from the vision standpoint. I'm saying we don't have necessarily reporting from Schreier that there were problems with the production. But do you think maybe Casey Hudson came in and saw something that was like what was happening on Anthem and Mass Effect, and he said, whoa, before we get 4 or 5 years deep into this, let's just take all the lessons we learned about problems with production and efficiency in Anthem and Andromeda that are already starting to affect Dragon Age 4, and let's just start from scratch and do it right this time.
Maybe. I will say that the article very specifically states, by 2017, EA had not been secret about its desire to make all of its major products into games as a service. So I don't know if like that also played a part into it, because that is kind of fits in the timeline and is, I guess, kind of is another reasoning. But like, Anthem is supposed to be one of the games as game as a service. Now I will say, could it be, because this is something I was thinking of one day, we talked about a couple episodes ago, I don't remember which one it was exactly, game development is so much more expensive than it used to be. And we were thinking like, oh yeah, I wouldn't mind paying for Dragon Age if it was like, $100 or something, because I want them to make the game that's good. And trying to think of other ways of like, oh, maybe if they make smaller games and sell it for whatever. What if games as a service is just their alternative to trying to, I guess, make back the costs, but still have a game just be $60. Does this make sense? Am I wording this right?
Oh no, I think I've talked about this on the show before. That's exactly what it is. The price point has stayed at $60 for too long, and it would not be considered palatable across the market for video games to be $70 or $80. And so they're trying to make up for that somewhere else. Honestly, I think they should just raise the prices, but that's just me.
That's fair, but I would that actually sell? And I feel like maybe Casey was like, because a quote from the article is that the game was going to be smaller in scope than Inquisition. Inquisition, if you just played it on like story mode or whatever, 60 hours. Does it mean it was going to cut out all the fluff and like it was just going to be 60 hours of solid content? Like I'm wondering if Casey saw like, okay, this game's going to be too tiny to sell well, and people are going to be like, oh, I paid $60 for blah blah blah. I guess I maybe what I'm agreeing with you here is that he saw like, okay, this isn't going to sell well for certain reasons. Maybe the game's really good, but maybe the market's not going to like it, so we're going to try the games as a service and do it that way.
Possibly. I kind of, like I said, it's rampant speculation. I don't know how. I don't know how attached even I am to my own theory. I guess to poke holes in my own theory. If it was coming from Casey Hudson, somebody would have told Jason Schreyer that, right? Because they probably would have been mad. Actually,
that's fair.
The more I think about it, and let's talk about this. This is maybe the biggest thing in this whole article. Mike Laidlaw left because of this.
It sounds like it, yeah.
I think it's like that's why he left. I don't think, you know what? Now that I think about it, I don't think Casey would have done that, because I think Mike would have tried to say, I think he would have told him what he was doing before he did it. You know what I mean? Like, if you do this, I'm leaving. I don't think Casey Hudson would have done that. I think that would have been foolish to lose someone like Mike Laidlaw over whatever reason. Yeah, and the more I think about it, I mean, he says in the article that they liked what they had, right?
Apparently people did find that it was going well, and it was still in early production. But like, I guess I'm just trying to grasp at anything, because I just don't get it. I just don't get it.
It would be a monumentally stupid move on EA's part if they stop this. If we find out that that's true, good lord, that would be dumb. Talk about that for a little bit. We talked about Mike Laidlaw leaving when it happened, and I think we took the most positive view possible on it, but now it seems quite clear that he left because of that. When you read that, what did you think?
Well, I will say, I honestly, I didn't go back and listen to that episode. Maybe I should have, but like we gave the best explanation that we had information on, if that makes sense. Like, we did the best job we could.
Absolutely, yeah.
I stand by whatever the hell I said 2 years ago or whatever. But it did really sound like he left because he was upset that Joplin got trashed for whatever reason. But I feel like I just get this nagging feeling that we're missing something. And I can't stop thinking about it, I guess. Like, Joplin got trashed for a reason. Maybe that has something to do with Mike Layla leading to, but there's something there we don't have, and I feel like it's extremely important to the story. And I don't know why it's not even touched. Like, I feel like it's just glossed over in the article, and maybe we're just not quite getting something. But at least from how EA handled Anthem, EA, we think, handled Anthem really well. Why do we suddenly think they're making a stupid decision with Dragon Age? It's not like, it's probably the same people involved, right? You would think. So why did they make a smart decision there but a dumb decision here? Like, I feel like something happened. We're just missing something, and it bothers me.
you're that's a very good point. You're bringing up a really good point. I can try and maybe speculate why. Okay. The actions that I really like from EA are sort of the catastrophe mode actions, right? They're sort of course-correcting actions where an executive is seeing something is going really wrong. They're delivering resources. They're raising the bar. They're giving very clear feedback. So maybe EA is just, they're good at that, right? Those are just, their executives have good skills in that area. But when it comes to planning and sort of vision and the fact that they are enamored with live service, with the live service model for everything, they're not so good, right? So it's kind of like the tale of two EAs, right? They're good at helping you fix problems when things are really catastrophically going bad, but they also have a flaw in that they're really way too attached to live services, and they're not afraid to sort of push people towards that. And they can't do anything like that when it comes to Star Wars, because there's bigger fish. You know what I mean? Like, Disney is just bigger than them. Maybe that's the reason why.
I guess when my main takeaway from the article is I was just left with more questions than answers. Like, I'll say, like, kind of backing away from the questions part, like, while I am sad for the loss of Joplin and what could have been, I don't necessarily think that Morrison's going to be a disaster either. Like, the ideas that they said, like, oh, you know, it's going to, they specifically say in the article, it's going to be a single player story with an added co-op. I don't mind that. I really don't. That, like, if they do that right, that could be cool. And there's this term going around, like, Anthem with dragons. Now, I will say that why that is a quote from the article then states some of my sources say, like, oh, it's going to be Anthem with dragons, but I think it mentions that, like, that's the cynical view. Other people are very hopeful for the project. And that it's not going to be Anthem with dragons, it's going to be Dragon Age with just, based around this code base. So, and completely disagree with the Anthem with dragons thing. So I guess while I wish it would come out earlier, and I wish that we got Joplin, I don't necessarily think that Morrison's going to be a bad game. You know what I mean?
I don't know if it's going to be a bad game. I'm significantly less excited for it, though.
That's fair. But then again, like, we don't know anything about Morrison other than the co-op part, really. On Joplin, we got, like, a whole bunch more information. Like, if we had that same amount of information for Morrison, maybe you could have the same amount of love for Joplin as you do Morrison. We just didn't get enough information on it. And I do think part of that is that Bioware is still kind of developing what Morrison will be, so we don't really know. But I think that if the team that came up with those ideas, they're probably in love with those ideas and probably want to keep those. So I imagine that a fair amount of Joplin does make it into Morrison. I guess I just don't know what scope. So I guess I feel like, I don't know. I don't think things are going to be as bad as people are worried it is. Not to say that it isn't. We're not in a great situation, but I don't think this is going to be the end of the Dragon Age series in a sense.
Well, it might have been anyway, right? I mean, as far as just this story, this arc, like, this was going to be, at least for a while, this might have ended the saga.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, so I will say that a long time ago, something came out that they say that they planned for 7 games, but things change so much. Who knows how much that's actually the truth of it? We really don't know. I will say that from that one thing that we talked about earlier with, non-traditional end screens or whatever, that does sound more like a series ender to me. And, like, they were going to have, like, oh, okay, the the next Dragon Age 5 is going to be set across the sea, and like, okay, whatever. Like, that could be a thing. But I don't know. I guess I'm not, because I'm an optimist. I look on the bright side. I'm not worried for Dragon Age 4 to be a bad game because of this. You know what I mean?
I am.
Okay.
I those are two very important perspectives, because neither one of us has enough evidence to be certain of that. And I think you're 100% right for just saying, look, we don't know. Right. So what exactly am I worried about? I hardly know anything about Morrison. The only things I know about Morrison are the fact that it's probably going to have co-op and that it's going to have more of a live services focus. Okay, that's enough for me to, like I said, be less excited. I know for some people it's like, hey, it's drop in, drop out co-op. You can completely ignore it. Kind of. You can kind of ignore it. I just like offline games. I like knowing that when I'm playing a single player game and people see me online, they go, oh, he's playing a single player game. That's fine. And as opposed to like, oh, well, like I'll send him an invite and see if he wants to drop into my, and then I feel bad because I'm ignoring my friends and just whatever. Like,
why don't you go on to Invisible then?
Okay, so then you go on to Invisible, and I still feel like an asshole because I'm like, why am I going on to Invisible? Why am I hiding from my friends? Like, it's this weird thing, and I don't know. I don't like it. I like single player games being siloed. Also, from a design perspective, if you just make a single player game and you do not design the layout of the the layout of the levels, how the enemies scale, even the AI behaviors of enemies, the character progression, the skill pathing, all of that. If you design it with no thought whatsoever for how that stuff works in a co-op setting, that co-op's actually not going to be very fun. So you have to design it with co-op in mind, but once you start to do that, then the balance of it in single player is not going to be correct. We have to remember that there's design architecture for both of those two things, and they're separate. And if you try and combine it to be the best of both worlds, it's not really going to be the peak experience of either. So that's what really concerns me about the co-op aspect of Dragon Age, is that it's not going to be a peak single player experience because it's trying to balance these other sensibilities that it needs to have in order to be a successful co-op game. So that gives me pause. That makes me worried. I would be lying if I said that I wouldn't be ecstatic if we saw, 2 years from now, you know what? We decided co-op's actually not going to be in Dragon Age 4. I would do backflips if I found that out later. I'd be much happier to find that out. I think I'll go ahead and take the cynical side on this one. I mean, you said you're an optimist, which is good because we need more optimists. I wouldn't say that I'm a cynic, but I definitely am going to ride heavy on skepticism for this one.
Okay. I think I'm not going to argue with you because I think either way, again, too early to tell. Yeah. It's too early. Not even Bioware knows what Morrison's going to be at this point. So I think that we just got to keep an eye out, I guess.
Yeah, which is, I don't know. It's, in a way, it's kind of scary that, I hope that they really sort a lot of this stuff out, right? I hope that they get a really strong creative vision as early as possible. They avoid the problems on Andromeda and Anthem. Whether it's co-op or not, I hope they knock it out of the park. I said the same thing about Anthem when I wasn't sure if Anthem was going to be for me. I said, I still hope they knock it out of the park, man, because, I want another fucking Mass Effect game. I need these.
That reminds me of one little nugget hidden in, I already forgot what article it was, but they did say that they are working on something with Mass Effect.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, for sure.
So apparently that's a thing. But, okay, here's a question. So, the game got rebooted in, you said, late 2017. It's currently 2019. We got a teaser, a very, very light teaser trailer in December 2018. When do you think we're going to hear next about Morrison?
Oh, boy.
Or Dragon Age 4?
That is a real tough question. I have no clue. I don't...
Because we... The articles was talking about, like, the game, like, Morrison was kind of estimated at 2 to 3 years. 2 was said more often. I think 3 was only said once, so I'll throw that out. So we're kind of looking at a release date of, 2021, around that era. or unless it counts this 2019 as a year, so that'd be like 2020, I guess. But I don't know. But which that's another thing I was questioning. Like, when did he take these accounts? Because if these accounts are a year old, then that 2-year estimate is now more like a year. Anyway, that's a whole nother story. But yeah. So I was trying to look up Andromeda stuff, and we got the first Andromeda teaser, I believe, in 2 years to a year and a half before the game actually came out. So we could get like a decent, like another teaser this year, maybe. I really don't know.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think? When do you think the game, if you had to take a guess at it now, when do you think the game's coming out, and when do you think we'll see something next?
I'll say this every time I say something, it always ends up not being that. So I'm gonna say it's gonna come out tomorrow. That way honestly, I don't know. From the article I did, assuming that these are more recent numbers that he's putting in it, 3 years, I think is a fairly reasonable basis. So if we count 2019, that's probably maybe like a 2021 release. Because so far all the games have been released in like March, April area. So I'm assuming like March, April 2021. And we'll be getting, like, 2020 is the year when we get all of the cool commercials and stuff like that. And that's going to be kind of the press. So I feel like 2019, we might get a bone. Like, they might throw us a bone. And that's about it, is what because I feel like they're still trying to work out the kinks on Anthem. So I feel like 2019 is going to be devoted to Anthem, getting it to where they want it to be, and then kind of releasing content and expansions for that. And then when 2020 rolls around, that's when we're going to start getting the media cycle for Dragon Age 4, and then release date 2021. That's my guess. My hope, I guess.
Yeah.
That's what I should say. But
it's tough. I mean, I'm trying to think back to what my predictions were prior. I think maybe you did a video at one point where I did like a little piece of it, like a little guest spot on one of your videos.
Yeah, I did it for summing up all the Dragon Age 4 news we had last year at E3. So.
And I can't remember what I said, but I think I had some estimate of like, maybe 2021, something like that.
That was your estimate, yeah.
I don't actually agree with that now. I think it's going to be longer than that.
Oh, okay.
I'm probably going to say I don't know when, 22 or 23. I don't know. For some reason, I have a feeling that based on how things have gone on the 2 most recent developments and the fact that this one has been rebooted, might take a bit longer than they thought. I know that they probably think that the code base being carried over from Anthem is going to help. Maybe it will. I don't know specifically what that entails. I don't know enough about software development and specifically about software development on games to know how much that helps them. But I still get the feeling it's going to be longer than 2021. I hope I'm wrong. I sure hope I'm wrong.
Well, I will say that they apparently report a lot of problems with Frostbite, so then that would be consistent with that if they come into problems and do whatever. So, now here's another question that someone was saying. If it's game as a service, are they going to pull the Anthem thing, or like when you boot up Dragon Age 4 on the release date, you're only going to be able to play the like a little bit of chapter of it, and they're going to kind of continually put out little quote-unquote DLCs, but it's like the main story but broken up. You know what I mean?
Just to do it episodically?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. I think that there's some grounds for that as a good idea. At one point, at one point I know that was getting a lot more popular, right? Like Telltale did a lot with episodic, and very, story-driven games, obviously, from them. It obviously depends on how long the pieces are. I wouldn't hate that, possibly. But I also like to just, blast through 40, 50 hours of a Bioware game in a week. I took vacation off of work to play Inquisition. I did the same thing for Mass Effect 3. That is one of the few, stupidly childish, irresponsible things that I get to enjoy doing is when a Bioware game that I love comes out, I can just, be a dork and, play it hardcore for a week. I wouldn't be able to do that if they did episodic content, but I wouldn't necessarily hate it depending on how long it is.
I feel like I would have a problem with it if they start treating it like extending the story longer than it needs to be. You know what I mean? Like kind of going I don't know, what's a TV show that's been going on to
The Walking Dead.
I was gonna say the one about the two brothers in the car and they go fight demons or the fuck Supernatural. There you go. That's been on way too long. But yeah, that kind of thing where they're like, well, what we're doing is making money, so we're just going to keep going. I guess the point I'm getting at is that I just want Soderlund closure, BioWare. Please don't drag it out for 2 more years after the game comes out. I'm going to die. Release my soul. But yeah, I guess that's my fear, is that they're going to drag it out like a bad TV show because it makes money rather than just like, here's our story, bye, see you in Dragon Age 5. I guess that's my worry.
Yeah, episodic wouldn't be terrible, but it wouldn't be my favorite thing. I mean, really what I want, and this, I sound like one of those old Bioware fans, like I just want a good old classic Dragon Age game, which is really sad because it sounds like that's what we were going to get, and who knows, we might still get that in a sense, but that's just really what I want.
Yeah. So yeah, I is there anything else you feel like saying about these topics?
So much, honestly. Like I had a ton of notes. I probably maybe mentioned half the stuff on them, but that might be for the better because I feel like we could talk about this all day, and I probably talked about it a lot less than some other people on Twitter. I have not made any videos about it, and I think part of that is just because I'm partially not entirely sure how to feel about it. It seems like a rough time for BioWare, and I wish for the sake of the people there that it wasn't so rough. Mm-hmm. But it also seems like a strange time, and these two things are not equivalent, I realize that, but a strange time for BioWare fans, because it seems very much like a lot of the things that we liked about BioWare are having problems manifesting. BioWare is still trying to do them, but they seem to not be able to do them anymore, or not as much or not as well. So a couple of sad things there. And then as far as like, well, what I think about it, I don't know. I'm reluctant to say that those two things are necessarily related. Maybe the production problems and the working conditions, maybe those two things are not the reason why the games haven't been as good. Or maybe they are. I don't know. That's a tough thing. That's a tough thing to say. What is your overall takeaway from both of these?
I guess my main takeaway is, I guess, I feel like my biggest takeaway in this is just we don't really know. I know that sounds really dumb, but like there's just so many factors that we don't really know what it is that I almost feel like it's not. Okay, I'm going to say this, and it's going to sound terrible. Who cares? Like,
yeah, to a certain extent, you're right.
Yeah, like I kind of went on a rant about this one midnight on Twitter, trying to like I guess develop my own feelings on this because like I feel like I feel like I really want Dragon Age. Like I really like Dragon Age. I totally get that. I'm obsessed with it. Look at my life, but I don't want to have to worry about this for 2-3+ years.
You're right.
Like I like BioWare, but so I'm gonna be very honest. I don't want to like say too much on this. I actually messaged Jason Schreyer about like, hey, I read your article and about BioWare and the working conditions. Like to very sum up, is there anything we can do as fans? And he replied like, that's a really good question, but I just don't think, like, I don't know. I don't think there is. And I'm like, other than just like getting their story out there. And I was like, great, thanks. And like, I feel like that's all you can really do is just make people aware of it. And like, that's it. That's all we can do. I've already done that. Now what do I do? My hands are tied. Yeah. So I'm just going to sit. I don't know. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to sit here and just take what they give me, and if I don't like it, that's fine. Yeah. Like I'll admit I'm a big enough fangirl for Dragon Age 4 that even if it's a bunch of bullshit, I'm going to enjoy something out of that. So like I guess I'm not really that worried about it because I just don't want to care. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense, and that I actually think helps me realize a little bit more of my own feelings on it and why there was sort of this reluctance for me to talk about it, because
Mm-hmm.
It is a really interesting question of like, what can we do? And the answer is like, well, really nothing, as you and Schreier talked about, which is like not that much. But what I want to do, what I'm inclined to do, because I have some level of familiarity with what I think is happening in BioWare, is I want to problem solve for them. Like I talked about before, like I'm an analyst. Like I hear things where they go, oh, well, we're having this problem with, either deadlines, goals, pipelines, scope of projects, meetings aren't being, we're having problems working site to site. And I'm like, oh, well, what you should do is X, Y, Z, this blah, blah, blah to fix it. And it's like, you know what? I don't work at BioWare. I don't work at EA. I have to deal with, the issues that come up in my own professional, hurdles that you have to deal with in working with your own workplace. It's like, why? I don't know. Maybe it's just voyeurism. Maybe it's just that fans want to feel like we're involved when we're not, because we're not involved. BioWare and EA need to fix these things internally, and it's going to be hard. It's going to take a lot of tough decisions. Some of the ways to solve these problems actually aren't going to be popular. And they're going to have to do it anyway. I mean, one thing that I will say coming away from all of this is that BioWare really needs very strong leadership right now. I hope Casey Hudson is up to it. I think he is up to it. But it's going to take more leadership, not less leadership. Sometimes I think that the problem that people can slip into is when there is bad leadership, they think that they should have less leadership. Right, because the leadership hasn't been good, so they want to disempower leaders. They want to listen to leaders less. They want to sort of make things happen more by committee, more by consensus, because there have been bad leadership decisions. But the response to bad leadership is not less leadership. It's more. It's better leadership, and they're going to need a lot of it. BioWare is going to need a lot of it, and maybe EA is going to have to step in a little bit more. Maybe there's going to have to be some more Patrick Soderlund stepping in. He might have to be a little bit closer to the studio to make sure that they're getting what they need. I think it's going to be a long road back to BioWare having some of the same value, executing on some of the same values that they used to have. I tweeted out a piece of a talk that Ray Musica gave at a startup conference when he was talking about the old BioWare values and sort of what they were and how to balance them. I think it's going to be a long time before they can get back to that type of balance. Even if Dragon Age 4 is successful and everything else, I think it's going to be 2 or 3 releases. Like they need 2 or 3 development cycles where they get this right in order for their culture to be restored to the point where everybody feels like it's okay again.
Yeah. No, I agree. So yeah.
Yeah, it's exhausting. It's exhausting. It's exhausting and depressing to think about. And then I remind myself, Caitie, I'm glad I don't have to be the one to do it.
Exactly, yeah. So I guess kind of going back on that point, like you listener, you probably care because you're listening to this. Maybe you just you're just sitting with the popcorn because you like the drama. Maybe you just like hearing us banter. Maybe you just want to know what's going on. Maybe you really care. But at the end of the day, whatever your position is, unless you literally work at BioWare, we can't do a good goddamn thing. Other than just, like, I guess, stating your opinion of, like, I don't like this, I don't like whatever. And, like, that is something I guess they could use, Like, Schreier at one point said on his Twitter that if people keep talking about it, it might actually get brought up in meetings and whatnot. And, like, maybe. So I guess, like, fan cryouts can do something. I'm not saying like we're entirely hopeless, but like I think this particular thing of like management going weird, like we don't know the full story. Even with the Schreier thing, there's a lot we don't know. There's a lot we can't think of, and there's a lot of problems that like maybe like we just can't fix. We can't really do anything about, and nothing we can do can fix it, and we just have to be okay with that. We have to be okay with not having the control in our hands and coming to peace with that. And I feel like a lot of the discomfort's coming in that because, like, we read this and, like, we get all emotional about it and we want to do something and then we realize we kind of can't other than just, like, bitching about it. So, which could be powerful, but at the end of the day, like, a good chance, like, unless you have, like, a fairly large following on, like, Twitter or YouTube or Reddit or whatever, no one really cares about what you say. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
like,
it's true.
I have, I think people see me that I have like a decent sized audience and whatnot. I don't. I'm so small time and little. Like, nothing that I say is gonna matter. Like,
that's because
nothing that you say.
That's because you're actually self-aware. Some people aren't, but you actually have self-awareness. You have perspective on it, which is good. But you're right. It is a fact that many of us use social media as a platform to make ourselves feel like our opinions really matter. And they matter conceptually. They don't matter practically.
Yeah.
Not in this case, they don't.
Yeah. So, I guess that's my... I just want to, like, talk this out. Maybe this could cut out or whatever. But, so, last December, we had this huge Dragon Age day where we just said, like, thank you to Bioware for Dragon Age because that's what we like. And it was this thing that we worked on with months. And, I thought was... we raised a lot of money for a charity and whatnot. And that was kind of beknownst to us. That was like so, like, I think only a couple days before the Dragon Age teaser came out. And I kind of wonder, like, was that something they needed to hear? You know what I mean? Like, did we accidentally do a good thing? Like, we kind of just wanted to, like, say that message, because we like Dragon Age and we know it's taken a while, but like seeing after all of this bullshit that's happening with Anthem and with the crunch and stuff like that, I wonder if that, like, I don't know, I guess maybe this is tooting my own horn. I kind of hope that in the best way possible, I kind of feel like something like that's like the best way we can say thanks for your hard work, we appreciate it. Like, that's the best we can kind of hope for. So I don't know, I just kind of hope we did something good there. And like I guess that's just me talking out my own feelings about what happened with that, but I hope so too. It's just kind of weird reading this article and then like that whole giant thing we did and being like, oh wow, I wonder if that was bigger than we thought it was, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, for them. Yeah, I'd never thought of that, but I mean, simply put, yeah, I hope so too. I hope it helped. Yeah, well, we'll see. But anyway, I have nothing else to add on this. Do you, Jordan? It's been like 2 hours. It's going to be another long one. Yeah, I feel like there's so much that I didn't say that I thought I wanted to, but I don't want to talk about this anymore. That's fair. That's fair. It's I feel like we don't know when the next Bioware game is going to be, right? It's going to be years one way or another. And so I feel like we are going to get a chance to talk about this a lot more in the future somehow. Oh my god, I didn't even think about it. Jordan, what the fuck are we going to do for 2 years? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to play Outer Worlds, and I'm going to play Cyberpunk. That's not what this podcast is. It is now. No, I'm just kidding. Welcome to Split the Games Industry, where we talk about whatever the fuck we want, Split the punk, split the cyber, split the outer... Split the cyber. Split the outer something, I don't know. Anyway, Jordan, where can they find you so we can just end this and go on? They can find me at the Exalted March on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. Where can folks find you, Caitie? Ghildirthalen. I had to remember my name there for a minute. Ghildirthalen on YouTube and Twitter. Gillanon on Reddit if you're so inclined. I say you messaged me, but I'll be honest, it's been a couple months since I've even looked at it because, frankly, I'm afraid. But with that, guys, Dara Shiral.